So in this video, we're just going to quickly review how we would implement those 5 or 6 um, dimensions in a single 2D graph. So for this one, I've opened up Tableau and I'm going to open up the World Indicators database. And you'll see in this database we have country, region, which is continent, year, and then a whole bunch of measures to look at for each country in each year. So what we're going to be looking at is female life expectancy and the GDP of the country. So we've placed 2 measures in here, some of GDP and some of life expectancy, and we get one big dot, right? And that's because what it's doing is it's summing up the the GDP of all countries across all years, and it's summing up the life expectancy of all countries, all years, and it's giving us this single dot. Now, in order to get the detail that we want, we have to add a level of detail. So we're going to grab the country and drop it into detail. And now we're getting a circle for every country. But if you look here, is the GDP of the United States $172 trillion? Well, no, because this is also summing across all years. And something you should be aware of, I'm going to hit undo, is if I go up to the analysis menu and I see here aggregate measures, when we had this very first dot, it's aggregating the measures across all of the dimensions that are in the database. So country, region, year, etc. Now if we uncheck aggregate measures, we get a dot, but now we're getting a dot actually for the same country over and over and over again. All right, so we added the country to the detail, and that got us 1 dot for China, 1 dot for the United States. But if we drop year into the detail, now we're going to get dots for every one. Now we don't want this right now. So I'm going to undo and take year out. But what we've done so far is we've implemented 2 dimensions, the X placement and the Y placement. And again, it's always a good idea to not leave your visualizations just called sheet. So we're going to say female life expectancy and hit OK. All right. Now, so that was our first 2 dimensions. Now the next dimension we might use is size or color. Before we do that, I want to change the mark to a circle so they're filled in. I prefer that look. It's easier for people to compare the dots, especially when we start changing the size. So let's do that. Let's make size reflect population. So I'm going to grab population total and I'm going to throw it into size. And now you see that we have big dots for places like China, smaller dots for places like Hong Kong. Now these dots are kind of small, so I'm going to go ahead and make them a little bit bigger. And of course, we know still that we are aggregating all of these by year. And so this scale is going to end up changing once we don't aggregate by year. But now we've added 3 dimensions. We've got X and Y placement, and now we've got size. The next thing, just kind of to duplicate Rosling, we're going to use region for color. And now we're going to have a different color for each of the regions, Americas, Africa, Asia, etc. We see here that life expectancy for Africa is kind of uniformly low. Life expectancy for Europe is kind of uniformly high. And now we're at 4 dimensions, X and Y placement, size, and color. Now the next thing we're going to do is add that animation. So I'm going to grab year and drag it into pages. Now notice everything shifts. Our scale in GDP and in life expectancy is now in the scale we would expect. You know, life expectancy is not 1100 years. It's more like it's 90 or 80 years, etc. And you'll notice here that now we've got country, region, year, GDP. All of these things have been sliced and diced, so we're only looking at data for 1 year. Now, if you haven't done animation before, the animation toolbar is over here now. If I want to show the history of marks for all the marks and hit play, you're going to start seeing that animation come into play. And now we're starting to see 5 dimensions. Now remember, we are only going to use size or shape, because take a look what happens. If I go over here and I change this back to shape, and I pick the shape to be the filled palette, and I hit OK. Oops, got to do one more thing. I want the filled palette, and I've got to put region onto shape. And I guess I got to go back and do it again because I did it wrong. Filled palette. Right, now I got to pick for Africa, for Asia, for Europe, etc. And now I have my shapes. You see that using different shapes doesn't add anything or very much, if anything, to the color. And it makes it much more hard to interpret the differences between the size of a circle, the size of a square, etc. So we're only going to use size or shape, not both together. All right. So now this should show you how to implement the Rosling graph or implement those maximum number of dimensions in a 2D graph.